the conclusion of the retopologizing stage, the details of our mesh tend to get a little soft, and a really great example of this is here inside the character's face. I have a lot of really wonderful sculptural details that were in the high resolution's concept sculpt that just kind of lost its intensity when I retopologized it. In every sense, we've gone from a very high resolution sculpture to a relatively low resolution retopologized base mesh, and that's okay, that's fine, that's part of the process, and I intentionally make things a little bit stronger in that concept sculpt, knowing that they're going to get smoothed out a bit when I retopologize. But if there's a way that I can go in and kind of preserve some of that information, I'd like to. And the first thing that I need to do is to import in the Blender file that included all of that original concept sculpting stuff in here. And inside of Blender, we have linking and appending. We don't want to import a Blender file. If all of this information is preserved inside of a .blend, a native Blender file, we can very quickly go in and access that through a wonderful, wonderful system inside of Blender. Let me show you how it works. I want to bring in the high resolution concept sculpt, but I just want to bring in the model itself. Now to do this, we're going to go to the top of the screen where it says File, and we're going to go, got to be in object mode first, excuse me. Let's do link and append. Now these two are similar in structure. We'll talk about link second. I want to start talking about append first, because this append option is really going to give us the ability to import in existing Blender mesh objects, or any data container that is, inside of Blender pretty quickly. So let's do it. What we're looking for here is the specific Blender file, and I happen to know that I have the Blender file that includes all of my high-resolution sculpting data in version 9 of my project file. So we're going to select it, navigate to where you saved it on your computer, and we're going to hit append. Now the first thing that you're going to see is a whole list of files and folders, which is probably not what you're expecting to see initially. Because if you look at the path here, we're in the location that you save the computer or save the file on your computer. However, now we're looking inside the blend file. These are all the folders that exist on the inside of our blend file. It's not just a singular object, that blend file. It's a whole bunch of stuff. And what we were seeing are all the data containers that Blender natively uses to place and create all of our objects. And we have two that are really important for us in this particular moment. We have object, and then we also have mesh. Now the way this works, I'm actually going to hit cancel here for a second, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, because I can show you real quickly how this works inside of the outliner over here on the far right-hand side of the scene. If you look at the two objects that I have inside of my scene, I have an object for the body and then another object for the shell. Each of one of them has these little green icons next to it, which is different than the object for the light and the object for the camera. All of these are objects first, and then if we expand it, we're starting to see individual data containers. And this icon here is the data container for a mesh, for geometry, for vertices inside the scene, if you will. And it also has a material associated with that data container itself. When we're appending our files inside of Blender, we get to pick and choose which one of these that we want to bring in. Do we want to import in the object, which is going to include the data container for the mesh and the material, or do we just want the mesh or just the material? The larger point being is that we have a lot of options. We can choose everything or individuals. Okay, with that understanding in tow, let's return back to the append file. And I'm going to go back into, just make sure I'm in the right project file still. Yep, version 9. I'm going to go into the mesh folder. And here are all the mesh data containers that showed up inside of this blend file. And you can see that there's a whole bunch in here. And luckily, I did some good naming conventions and good naming for my file, because I named the data container that contained all of the geometry for my turtle body. And if we hit the append button, you can see here in a second, boop, there it is. It comes in as its own object inside of Blender. There's that data container that we were just looking at. I want to hide the visibility of the retopologized ones. And here's the original concept sculpture that I created in the previous version of my project file. This is the one that I took over into Maya and retopologized. This has a lot of my high resolution sculpting in there. You can see that the details are pretty punchy. You can see that there's some crisp transitions between these sculptural planes, and it's looking pretty good. I want to use this information to inform just kind of the touch-up modeling that I want to do for the sculpture now that it's done being retopologized. Okay. And luckily, it's all in the same spot, which is pretty cool. Now, I mentioned that there's a difference between append and link. When we append a project file, this information now gets imported as a first-class citizen inside of Blender. I can go into edit mode, and I can go in. It's pretty high res. There it is. I can continue sculpting on this object if I wanted to. We have access to all of the geometry. It's non-referenced. Okay, it's independent from the rest of the project file. It's not messing up version 9 in any way. This is an independent object inside of the entire system. Now, the big difference between append and link, and I'm just hitting the undo key here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to get rid of this object inside of my scene itself just by hitting the X key. And once again, I'm going to go back into the file menu. The link command is fundamentally going to do the exact same thing. It's going to go inside of a Blender file and allow us to import in existing data containers inside the app. However, this creates a referenced instance. It's only ever going to exist in object mode. I can't go in now, select the geometry. Yeah, see how it says unable to execute? I can't go in and sculpt anymore. It's being referenced externally from the Blender file. If I was to go into the version 9 project file of my sculpture, any changes that I made in the original would then ripple into the version 10 where this object is linked from. So it's a pretty cool, neat little system that allows us to create reference geometry that can persist in multiple locations. If we change the original location, in my case version 9, any place that version 9 project file shows up is also going to update, which is pretty cool. It also makes the performance of the app a little bit bigger. We're not having to hold all of those individual data containers to edit our verts and our polygons inside of our system memory. So it makes it a little bit more of an efficient workflow itself. Great for what we're trying to do because we just want to reference that information to continue to sculpt on top of my little project. This happens often when we're doing our retopologizing. We bring in our mesh that's been retopologized, and then we want to do some edits to the retopologized mesh to more closely match the details in our high-resolution concept sculpting. With the files linked and appended inside of my blend file, I'm ready to start this process by applying some modifiers.